What's up, Wolfpack? It's Sarah, and today I have a brand new video for you. I'm going to do something very different. I was very inspired by Kate Clifford Larson to do a video on Miss Rosemary Kennedy. If you're interested in this story, don't forget you could pick up the book. It's Rosemary, the Hidden Kennedy Daughter, and she made a Harriet Tubman book and a Mary Surratt book. I cannot wait to read these. Her lectures on here are absolutely perfect. I love them. And get her books. The year is 1918. Woodrow Wilson is our current president. World War I is about to end. And currently we have the Spanish flu. Rosemary's father was John Kennedy Sr. He was an American businessman, politician. He also did something with movies, and I think he was in the Prohibition, doing something like that. Her mother, on the other hand, was a socialite. She was the daughter of John F. Fitzgerald, who was a United States representative and the mayor of Boston. So, Rosemary was born on September 13th, 1918 in Brookline, Massachusetts. When Rose started to give birth, the nurse at the time knew that the doctor was going to take a while. So, she knew how to deliver a baby, but she was instructed for Rose to close her legs, to doing something very drastic. She took baby Rosemary's head, which is slowly coming out of the birth canal, and just pushed it in there. Pushed it back in the birth canal for 2 hours. That sounds a million times painful than ever. And when the doctor finally got there, 2 hours later, she finally gave birth to baby Rosemary Kennedy. Now, there are theories going around that this was the reason why for her mental disability, and it's like a good theory. And she was in the birth canal for 2 hours, deprived of air, so I would think that this is the main reason why she was the way she is. Rosemary was the third Kennedy and the first girl, so she was the third little baby, but she was the first girl. Rose was so excited to have this baby girl. Her older brothers were Joe Jr. and John F. Kennedy, who became our 35th president of the United States. As Rosemary started to grow up, her parents noticed that she was taking longer than her brothers did. At first, they knew nothing about it. It was okay, you know, girls develop later than boys. And she took longer to crawl, she took longer to walk, and to even speak. It wasn't until her younger sisters were born, like Eunice, Patricia, and Kathleen, aka Kick, was born, and they too were getting ahead of little Rosemary. And by this, they knew that Rosemary was very, very different from the rest of her siblings. Rosemary did go to public school, and in early years of education, she did have to repeat like kindergarten and first grade, and she was very different from her own age. They even gave her an IQ test, and she scored very, very low. Some would say that she went from this public school to being tutored, being in like a convent with nuns, and she was all like bouncing around. We see that when Rosemary was getting older and her care and education were getting more demanding, her parents would send her to multiple boarding schools in hopes that it would help Rosemary out. These schools would have programs that would help Rosemary, but when you change a child's school so often, this could have hardships on this child. And if you know, then if you're watching and you know that your parents went from state to state or never stayed in the same place, you know that it's hard. You know, you can't make any friends, and it's just hard on you. Just like any teenage Kennedy, Rosemary enjoyed sports as a teenager. They kind of roughed her up, thinking that all this was going to pass with her being roughed up by her family, but that's not true. Her family pushed Rosemary to the best of her abilities. She enjoyed shopping and spending time with family and friends, only she was frustrated. She felt she couldn't live up to the accomplishments of her fellow siblings, along with always wanting to please her parents and have approval of them. When you see her letters to her father, it's Dear Daddy, but when you see letters to her mother, it's Dear Mother. And she wrote to her father saying, "I would do anything to make you so happy. I hate to disappoint you in any way. Come to see me very soon. I get very lonesome every day." And the thing was with Rosemary, she just wanted to be a normal teenager. She just wanted to be a normal child to a normal teenager and get to do sports with her family. She got frustrated because she couldn't be just like her siblings, and you know, nobody likes to be treated differently. And I can see where Rosemary's mom, Rose, was frustrated because she was the only parent in the house watching after 9 children. 9 Kennedy kids with different needs. They did get some excitement though. On January 17th, 1938, Joe became the ambassador of Great Britain by Franklin D. Roosevelt. Rosemary and her sister Kathleen Kick Kennedy, that's Kick is kind of like her name, her nickname. They were presented to King George VI and Queen Elizabeth in a debutante. The British papers really loved Rosemary and often thought of her as mysterious, since she didn't say much, but they loved her a lot. During this time in England, she would also be traveling to Europe with her family often, and for the first time, this was like the first time she was actually happy. Around this time, Nazi Germany was becoming very, very aggressive, and Great Britain declared war on Germany, and most of the Kennedy children had to leave to the United States. The 2 that stayed was Rosemary and her father. They stayed in the UK, and she went to a Montessori school. It's like Belmont House in London, where she was learning, and she was better than ever. Even her father wrote to her mother saying that she looked better, she was acting better, she was just better all together. Finally, Rosemary felt like she was doing something right. This was the best for her. She was traveling, she was being understood, her needs were met, she was getting smarter and better. Only that kind of happiness didn't last long. Nazi Germany was aggressive, and pretty soon Rosemary and her father had to leave the United Kingdom and go back to the United States. And this was around like 1940 to 1941. When Rosemary came back to the United States, they instantly put her back in a convent. Only it wasn't the Belmont House that she was used to in London. She became more rebellious, and she didn't have a positive lifestyle like she did in the UK. This rebellious behavior led to Rosemary sneaking out at night. Many thought she would be kidnapped, easily taken advantage of, or some big scandal was going to break out. The sisters at the convent told Joe about what had happened, and her parents were trying to seek out more treatments for Rosemary. Dr. James W. Watts and Walter Freeman assured Joe that the lobotomy was the way to go. It would calm her mood swings and stop these occasional outbursts. She had her life all in UK, and for her to change, to go to a 180, to go back to the United States, that just like hurt her. And maybe that just like developed like this frustration and this more anger coming forward because she had that life in the UK, and now she's back to where she was. It is frustrating when that happens to you, and I feel bad for her. Joe and Rose had discussed this at one point, and Rose reached out to Kick, and Kick, working as a journalist, you know, she got some information, and she came back to her mother and said that this was not the way to go. You could say that she talked about her feelings with her husband, but her husband gave the okay for Rosemary to get a lobotomy. And when she got this lobotomy, Rosemary just turned 23 years old. And this was a prefrontal lobotomy, so all of this right in here. The front of her head was shaved. She was awake, she was terrified, and under a mild sedative. She was asked to recite the Lord's Prayer, to sing God Bless America, to recite little poems that she knew. And when she got quiet, they knew that something was wrong. Something terrible had happened. After the surgery, Rosemary was unable to walk or talk. This behavior problem would have been solved in another way, but you chose this surgery and for you to not listen to your own daughter. And this is like in fear of this coming out to the family. And even when she was younger, I forgot to put this in, but I'm going to put this in now. They feared that people would find out about her having a mental disability, and then the Kennedy genetics not being like good or pure or something like that. And then at this time, the Catholic Church was looked down upon people with mental disabilities, and that's sad enough. After the lobotomy, Rosemary was sent to a private psychiatric hospital that was 90 minutes north of New York City. Joe said no visitors were allowed to visit Rosemary, not even her family. No one was allowed to ask about her whereabouts, but when they did, and if they did, they just said, getting along quite happy, which could be meaning a lot of things. And in 1949, Joe Sr. started to worry that his secret would become public, that this lobotomy, the mental disability, everything will just blow up in the papers and everything will be exposed. And John had been elected to the House of Representatives. No one needed to know about Rosemary. So he moved Rosemary from New York to Wisconsin. There in Wisconsin, she lived on the grounds of the cottage of St. Coletta's School. She got personalized attention and therapy. She lived on the grounds for 56 years, the remaining years of her life. And some sources say that Joe Sr. visited her once or twice, and then there's some that said he did not visit her at all. That is so sad. You had all the money in the world. You were a politician, your father was a politician, let alone Rose's dad was also a politician. That made Rose a socialite. And you could have easily sent her to St. Coletta's in a cottage and have her own little thing, besides giving her a lobotomy. Or you could pay attention to her, ask her what's wrong, and then after the war, maybe well, you're rich, so you can easily send her back to this Montessori school or anything, but you didn't have to do this. You made her into... She was a 23-year-old woman, and after this lobotomy, it was said that she went to a 2-year-old. I could do a whole video on Joe Sr., let me know. Eunice said in an interview that it took over a decade to know where Rosemary was. John went to see Rosemary in secret in 1958, and this would inspire him to use his political power to inspire change. Rose did visit Rosemary. It had been 20 years since they last saw each other. By the 70s, Rosemary was back getting to know not only her siblings again, but her nieces, her nephews, especially on the Shriver side. The Shrivers seem to be taking well care of Rosemary throughout my research into this, and I'm so happy for that. She even went on vacations with them and still lived in St. Coletta's. Like, she went to, I think, Cape Cod, she was in Florida, so she did some traveling with her family, and it's so heartwarming to know that she did see her family again. And it's so hard that she had this lobotomy, and then in 1944, Joe Jr. was killed in an airplane accident, and then her sister was killed, and then everything else happened. But on January 7th, 2005, Rosemary passed away of natural causes. She was surrounded by her close sister and friend Eunice, Jean, Patricia, and Ted. Good things did come from Rosemary's life and Rosemary's story. John F. Kennedy once said, "We must promote to the best of our ability and by all possible and appropriate means the mental and physical health of all our citizens." That was President Kennedy in February 5th, 1963. Speaking of her brother John, after seeing Rosemary, Eunice pushed her brother for legislation. It was time for mental disabilities to come from the shadows into the light. On October 24th, 1963, President Kennedy signed a Maternal and Child Health and for Mental Disability Planning Amendment. A few days later, on Halloween, he signed another piece in legislation by funding for the construction of facilities related to the prevention, care, and treatment of people with intellectual disabilities. They include research centers who would study the causes of intellectual disabilities, universities related to diagnostic treatment clinics, and community-based centers for the care of intellectual disabilities. Because back then, Rosemary, no one knew how to teach someone with mental disabilities, and to have such great funding and to have teachers that knew how to teach someone with mental disabilities, it was a great start to getting this open and into the air, and for it not to be such hush. We will discuss Eunice Kennedy Shriver. On July 20th in 1968, Eunice founded the Special Olympics. Previously it was called Camp Shriver. The Special Olympics is the largest sports organization helping children, also adults, with intellectual and physical disabilities. Today, more than 5 million children and adults in 170 countries participate in the Special Olympics. It's great. I love this. I loved studying not only Rosemary but her siblings on what they did to help people that have mental disabilities as well. And we are going to talk about Miss Jean Kennedy Smith. In 1974, Jean founded Very Special Arts. VSA provided arts and education programming for youth and adults with disabilities. Smith traveled all across the world of VSA to advocate for greater inclusion in the arts for people with disabilities. And last but not least, we have Mr. Ted Kennedy. Ted played a major role in passing of Americans with Disability Act in 1990. It is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability. Under this, we have accessibility in public places because everyone deserves to see the world. Everyone deserves to see everything. They deserve proper education. They deserve to be treated with respect. People deserve to be seen and heard. That is the end of the video. I hope you liked this video. It took me a while to get all this stuff. I was listening to Kate Clifford Larson and her amazing lectures. I was reading articles on Rosemary. It was like a week of Rosemary research. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm so sorry if it was choppy or anything. I do get nervous with these types of videos because it was talking about someone's life, and even though it was so sad, there was so much goodness that came out of this. I have so many mixed feelings about things, but let me know in the comments, and let me know if you want to see a Kennedy special. That would be pretty awesome. All the Kennedy kids, including their parents, in one video. Make sure to like, to comment, subscribe, join this wolf pack. Let me know what you think. Peace, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.